Certainly something to think about, especially as our equipment gets bigger and we're getting these really intensive rainfall periods. We talked earlier about this glaying and modeling that's happening. Another clue is to look at where the majority of your roots are lying, and you can see it a little better on this face. You know, you're getting a lot of fine roots through here. When you start to get into this B horizon, there aren't as many. You've got some, you know, I'd say these are going down probably a foot at depth, and they're the real fine roots that we're seeing, which is as a result of the grasses that are growing here in between the rows, really. So again, you want to think that you're trying to create an atmosphere and an environment for those roots to be as hospitable as possible. There are a few challenges here, and when you look into this glade soil, there aren't very many roots. They're not going to want to grow down there. These colors are actually quite brilliant if you can see them. If you're looking at these soils at home and you're starting to see some of these, often the intensity of the color can indicate how long those periods of saturation are. So sometimes you'll see almost that gray color will be quite brilliant, almost a blue, and the orange can be quite striking as well. But that's very classic glaying and modeling there. You can texture this too. And you just need a little bit of water, which conveniently we have lots of. If your soil doesn't even form a ball and there's no cohesiveness to it, then you know you've got a really sandy soil type. If I tried to do this with that C horizon, I wouldn't be able to form a ball at all. But you just work it with a little bit of water, and eventually you get it kind of pliable. And I'm making a real mess here. But eventually you can do two tests. So it's whether or not the soil will form into a wire and then hold together, and you can see it's already starting to break off. So again, lots of clues telling me that this is likely a siltier soil type than a clay. I have a key that you can go through and it will key out your soil textures if you want to further describe it. Yeah. And then you just start to work it through your fingers. I'm hardly getting a ribbon there. It's breaking off probably at about 2.5 centimeters. So I'm probably in like a silty loam is what I would guess the soil is right now. But as I say, if I got back to the lab, I would actually spend a little more time doing this. Producers sometimes have a challenge telling the difference between a heavy clay soil and a silty soil. And I'll often go out to a field and they'll say, oh, I have a lot of clay in my soil, and in fact it's silt. Really, the difference between the two particles are the clay particle is a lot smaller. Silt, if you're doing this in the field, it feels like soap and it feels really slippery. So when you feel this, it has that slippery feel. Some people will say sometimes it feels like talcum powder if it's dry, where clay will be really sticky, and clay will really stick to your hands even after trying to wash it off. So this is a really nice example of soil aggregation, and you'll see this mostly in the topsoil. I always say it should look like a granola cereal where you have different sized aggregates. You want those aggregates to be fairly well formed, and they do aggregate stability tests. So you want them to be stable, but you want the soil to be friable at the same time. And the easiest way to think about it is if you were a root, do you think you would grow through this material quite easily? So a good balance of water holding capacity, yet lots of oxygen, and you'll have happy roots. These roots are Mother Nature's best piece of tillage equipment, really. You know, you can spend, you know, tens of thousands of dollars on tillage equipment, but one of the most effective pieces of tillage, I think, are both your roots and earthworms. They're biological things that you know, often are in the soil anyway, and if you leave them long enough, they'll do the work that they need to do. And when you pull this apart, you'll see there's a lot of fine roots all through this soil clod, and those aggregates are actually hanging onto the roots, and it's because those roots are constantly exuding root exudates and sticky substances that are helping to form these aggregates and increase the stability of the soil. And this is what you want to see. It'll help improve the trafficability on your soils. You know, if you're bringing heavy equipment across, it will buffer some of the effects. You can imagine every time you drag a piece of equipment across the soil, what's happening is you can get this kind of popping effect where your aggregates actually become smushed. And this soil actually doesn't look too bad that way. But it's certainly something to think about, especially as our equipment gets bigger and we're getting these really intensive rainfall periods. So I opened up this soil clod, and this is interesting. You can see a little bit of an earthworm channel here. And in this soil, earthworm activity is going to be, in any soil, is really important. What I always find so neat about these channels is that often you can see there's a darker coating of the channel, which is actually the earthworm bringing down organic matter to depths. In this soil, because this channel is actually going through this kind of heavier sort of glade area, and it's creating a macro pore. So it's a pore that water is going to be able to infiltrate down through, and also that roots will actually find their way down. So it really increases your rooting depth. So the ability of earthworms to be able to do this is really important. And you can think when you pull a plow or set of discs through the ground, you're actually disrupting all these pores and channels. So you lose that effect.